So welcome to the Communication and Media Study Career Day, a collaboration between the Career Center and the Communication and Media Studies Department. My name is Scott Rappaport. I'm an Associate Director in the Career Center. Throughout the day, we've invited alums to join us for conversations about their careers in order to give you insight into different career paths, industries, and to get advice on how to enter and thrive in these fields. The sessions are going to be recorded, and our guest today is Katryna Perera. Welcome, Katryna. Katryna is a 2016 graduate from St. Joe's with a major in Communication and Media Studies. She now works for Law360 as a reporter. Katryna has worked at Law360 for almost 2 years, and prior to this worked at the Frederick News Post, also CBS This Morning and CBS News. While at St. Joe's, she was a news editor at The Hawk, and she also has a master's degree in journalism from Columbia University. I'm delighted to welcome her back to Hawk Hill, or at least virtually back to Hawk Hill. So welcome, Katryna. So I've got about 10 questions to ask, and then there will be plenty of time, I believe, for you all to ask some questions. Also, if questions come up during our chat, you can always put them into the chat box. Michael Clark, who is an associate director as well at the Career Center, is going to be monitoring that. And if a question comes up that he thinks we should kind of inject in, we'll certainly do that. All right. So with that, let's get started. Katryna, can you start by talking to us a little bit about your current role, some of the core responsibilities, and what does a typical day look like for you right now?
Yeah. So I'm a reporter with Law360. We are a online publication that covers in-depth legal news and analysis. So I'm a reporter for them. I'm part of a team. We cover securities law, compliance law, the banking industry, and the fintech industry. So that includes everything from cryptocurrency to NFTs to everything like that. So as a reporter, I cover stories in all four of those areas that I just mentioned. And my typical day looks like when I log on, my editor will have usually already assigned me a story to get started on. And I usually write on average between 2 and 3 stories a day, which I know kind of sounds like a lot. But it's not too bad because most of our stories are based on court filings. So when I start a story, there's usually a court filing that's just been filed in the case. And a lot of my reporting will come directly from that filing. And then, I'll usually reach out to the attorneys on the case and see if they want to provide any sort of comment. And yeah, I just pretty much do that for the entire day. I'll look for stories as well. My editor, if he sees something pressing, he'll assign it to me. But I usually just do a lot of reading of legal filings and writing. So, yeah.
Cool. What I'm going to ask you in a second about kind of some of your background and what you did before this, but like, what do you enjoy most about what you're currently doing?
I would say that I am constantly learning. I didn't know anything about like securities law or fintech or like anything that I cover before I started this job. And sometimes I look back and I'm like, I can't even believe the depth of knowledge that I have in those areas now. That's just like come without me even realizing it. If you had asked me 2 years ago, like if I could explain Bitcoin to you, I would have said absolutely not, but now I can, and it's crazy to me. So that's definitely the part of my job that I love the most, is that I just am constantly learning and I'm constantly retaining all this information without even realizing it. And also just like the people that I get to talk to, just as a journalist in general, all the people that I've met throughout my career, all the sources, all the subjects, that has been a really fulfilling aspect of it.
Great. So I think one of the things we're about to learn is that I will ask a lot of follow-up questions. And I have one that I think is really important for students to hear. So you just mentioned that you're working in an area where 2 years ago, it sounds like before you started, you said you essentially knew nothing about, right? So
Yeah.
how does somebody make that happen? How would a student who might see a job and say, well, this is interesting, but I don't think I know nearly enough about it to even apply, right? And my guess is maybe right out of undergrad, you might have felt that, but how do you overcome that? And how do you get over that barrier in the interview?
So I think that that really comes down to when you're in the interview, if you don't know anything about the beat that, let's say, the role is for, whether it's education or legal news or business or whatever, um, I think the way to overcome that is to really hone in on your skill, like your foundational skills as a journalist during the interview. Can you write well? Can you do research? How strong are your interviewing skills? How good are you at writing on a deadline or, meeting different deadlines of, whatever publication you're going to work for? Um, I think just like having those foundational skills and being really strong in those will help you get over that barrier of maybe not knowing the area that you're going to cover in this new role.
Great. That's really solid advice. Thank you. Okay, back to our set list of questions. So, um, how, how did you know that you wanted to do, this career path overall? And can you tell us a little bit about some of the things that have led up to your current role?
Yeah, so I came to St. Joe's undecided. I didn't know what I wanted to major in. I had a little bit of interest in communications and journalism, but I wasn't totally set on that. And then my sophomore year, I took a journalism class, and that pretty much sealed the deal for me. Um, Through that class, I got involved with the Hawk, and then I got incredibly involved with the Hawk, ending up being an editor. Um, and that lasted throughout my entire, 3 or 4 years at St. Joe's. But yeah, that was pretty much how it happened. I just kind of fell in love with journalism as soon as I took that first class, and then the rest is kind of history. So
Cool. Can you talk about a typical career path post college, and what has yours been typical? Do you feel like, or out of the ordinary? And kind of tell students a little bit about what you see in terms of even maybe some of the folks that you've worked with.
yeah. So I feel like there are two pretty typical um post-graduation paths for journalism. I think one of them is the one that I took, which is going to grad school, um, which has its, pros and cons. Both paths do. I felt like I wanted um, to just develop my journalistic skills a little bit more and go deeper into them, which is why I chose to go to grad school. Um, and, because of that, I've made tons of connections. I have a huge network, and it's definitely helped me. But then I think the other path is to just skip grad school altogether and just, go for start applying to jobs. And I think it depends on your experience, what kind of job you're looking for in journalism. I think, you kind of have to figure out which path you want to take personally. Um, but, I think starting in local news is always, always a good idea. Um, Local journalism is so, so, so critically important. And I think as a young journalist, there's literally no better place to be than in a local newsroom. You work really hard. You learn how to report stories with very limited resources. And that is something that will carry on throughout the rest of your career. You'll develop an incredibly great work ethic. And you'll just really learn how to do that, like hard hitting grassroots, you know, just really good community local journalism. So yeah.
Cool. Can you share maybe an example, something that sticks out in your mind of like an actual story of when you did that, and you know how that came to be, and like, I mean, why does that stick out in your mind? What do you really remember?
Yeah. So I worked for a local paper in Maryland for 2 years as an education reporter. Um, and I think that for a lot of my stories, I had to really rely on how trusts or how much the community trusted me as a reporter, and how much that trust then, turned into them wanting to talk to me, and give me tips or just give me their perspective, because I think it's different when you're covering a community that you're the only news source. So it's not like you can turn to the Washington Post or like the New York Times and like see what they've reported on it. It's just you. So you really have to develop those connections with people in the community, and just kind of be like a constant presence. Like I showed up to every single board of education meeting. I was there for every single, countywide school event, just to make sure that people knew who I was, knew my face, knew that I was the education reporter. And then over time, they started coming to me with stories. They started emailing me, phone calling me, saying, hey, you should look into this, you should look into that, or whatever. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if that answers your question, but I didn't have like, a like a just like a book that gave me all these story ideas, or like had all these contacts or anything like that. I had to develop it all myself. So
I mean, it sounds like the being there and putting yourself in the right place ended up paying off. And I mean, as you just said, like when they started coming to you, I mean, like your face lit up. You were like, I mean, you could tell that was a real win at that point for you. So that's great. Um, so you talked before about something that you really enjoyed. Is there anything that you wish you could change in your profession?
I think that I just wish that journalists were valued more by their own organizations, which sounds kind of bad, but I mean, I definitely think that especially in local journalism, local journalists are incredibly, incredibly underpaid. And I think that even as you get higher up, to more national organizations, there's a real um, hesitancy to give your employees what they need to just have like a general work-life balance or just do their job well. So I just wish that value was there, and that, companies or publications took more time to invest in their employees, and, give them like just like basic, benefits or pay raises, or whatever else is needed. I think that that's really, really lacking in this industry. So yeah.
Um, so we've got a question that has come into the chat. This is from Nick, and he actually asked two questions. The first is, what made you want to get into legal journalism? So I know you definitely talked about the career path overall, but then this change that happened about 2 years ago. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Mm-hmm. So I have always had an interest in law. I took, I think, one or two like legal law classes at St. Joe's. That was part of like the political science um, minor that I did. So I've had an interest in it for a long time. And when I was looking for a new job, and I've even considered going to law school at one point, but then that kind of got pushed aside. So when I was looking for a new job and I saw Law360, it kind of hit all my boxes of like, this hits all my boxes as a journalist, but then it's also an area that I'm interested in. And even though I didn't know anything about it, I, figured why not go for it? If it ends up working out, then it's kind of like combining two things that I want together. So that's sort of how I ended up in legal journalism. And I've loved it since I started. So it has sort of been just like a underlying interest of mine all this time that I finally kind of was able to act on.
So you seek this. This wasn't just something that kind of you stumbled upon and you're like, oh, let me give this a try. You seeked out and decided, hey, I want to move in this direction. Yes.
No, not necessarily. I was
Okay.
looking for a new job, and I was looking at all sorts of different journalism roles. And then I just I had never heard of Law360 before, and I stumbled upon it. And then when I learned about it and I read the job description, I was like, oh, this might actually be the perfect fit for what I'm looking for. So it was sort of like a stumble upon it kind of situation. Yeah.
That's how careers work sometimes. Is you do a lot of stumbling and you end up in the right place. So all
Yeah.
right, great. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk somewhat about kind of internships and experiences and what students can do. And I think part of that is always how you can network and use connections. And with that, I want to bring in the second question that Nick asked. Did you use connections in the local Maryland job to help you, with your career, either get that or get other, roles since then?
So I haven't used any connections from my time with the local paper here in Maryland I didn't use that to get my current job, but I will say that because of the work that I did as an education reporter with the local paper, I have had offers come to me, which is something that I never thought would happen. And the first time it happened, I was absolutely shocked, because it feels good, and you're like, oh, you're coming to me. But I've had a lot of education editors from different papers across the country reach out to me to see if I would be interested in, interviewing for a job that they had. So I haven't necessarily used the connections, but my work has opened up like, opportunities for me in that space. So
That makes sense, and I think that's a lot of the times how it happens. So, so you had mentioned before the Hawk and your experience at St. Joe's. Can can you tell us a little bit more about that? But then also, like, how did you leverage that when, um, looking for other opportunities, internships, even full time roles?
yeah, so I started out as a staff writer for the Hawk, and then I was assistant news editor for a year, and then full-time news editor for a year. And it was just, I mean, just the best experience. I think one thing that you mentioned, like leveraging that, I think that one thing that I really leaned on when I was getting internships while I was at St. Joe's, or, even later on, was that I was juggling a full course load while also doing like essentially like a full-time job for the Hawk. And that was a lot of work. And I just used that to show people who were interviewing me, what a good work ethic I have, and how organized I am, and how I can multitask. Because I don't know if anybody on this call works for the Hawk now, but if they do, they know that it is not an easy job, especially if you're at the editor level. There's a lot of things that come into it. There's a lot of late nights. So that was how I leveraged that experience, was just showing that how I can juggle so many different things and still put out, great articles, and we can put out a great paper every week. Yeah.
Well, are there any students who either have or are currently working um, for the Hawk? If you want to use like the raise hands to let us know, I think it would be a neat connection. Uh, I don't see anybody right now. Interesting. Um, so you just touched on, and it leads right into the next question that I have. You touched on in an interview. You talked about how being a full-time student and the amount of work you were putting in to the Hawk, you were able to use that as an interview, as an answer for kind of managing and multitasking and all that. And I was hoping that you could share maybe one or two interview tips with the students, either from interviews that you've been on or where you've interviewed folks that really you felt like they stood out for you a bit.
Yeah, I think that my first piece of advice, and I think this is pretty simple, but always, always, always look your best for an interview. It doesn't matter if you're in person or if you're on a call like this. I feel like I have dressed incredibly professional for every single interview I've been on. And if nothing else, it just gives off a good first impression of, this person is taking this seriously. And I think for journalists specifically, a really good interview tip is to have questions ready to ask the interviewer. As a journalist, you are expected to ask questions every day as part of your job. So you should be showing that in the interview. You should have questions about the company, about the job, just about the role. Just have some questions ready, and just show general interest in the role, and excitement for it. I think those are like my two biggest pieces of advice for an interview.
Do you have any go-to questions that you would ask? I know some of the questions are obviously going to be specific to the role or the company,
Yeah,
but were there others that you felt like were helpful for you?
I think one thing that I have asked in the past is something like, can you tell me a little bit about a person, or like a person that was in this role previously that was super successful, and what made them so successful in that role? Because I think that shows that you want to like copy that in a way, and be just as successful or more than that person. And I think that gives you a lot more information about the role as well, and sort of how hard you're going to be working, what it entails, that sort of thing, to be, the best and like what they're looking for.
I love that answer. As somebody who helps students prepare for interviews, and we talk about questions to ask at at the end, I think that that's a fantastic one. And just so that the students know, the only thing that you absolutely cannot do at the end of an interview when they say to you, "Do you have questions for us?" If you say no, you're essentially saying to them, "I have no interest in this job." So make sure, for many reasons, especially if you're going into journalism, as Katryna said, you have questions prepared and ready to ask. Great. So the next question that I have is, your SJU education included as keystones social justice and ethics. How has this impacted the work and or career decisions that you've made so far?
I think that ethics and social justice are also cornerstones of journalism in general. You as a journalist, your mission is to hold those in power accountable. As the age-old saying goes, give a voice to the voiceless. So that brings in social justice in every part. And ethics, I think, you have to walk an ethical line as a journalist. When I was at Columbia, one of our core classes was an entire semester just dedicated to journalism ethics, because it's so, so important. So just, making sure that you are telling the story in the best way, but in the most ethical way, and not making yourself a part of the story is really important. But I think having those classes at St. Joe's, it sort of brought it to the forefront for me, and it helped me keep it in mind as I've progressed throughout my career, because it was sort of like a foundational thing for me, having that at St. Joe's. So, as I developed and I, learned about more specific journalism ethics and things like that, it was like those foundational things that I learned at St. Joe's really like helped me keep going with that. Yeah.
Great. Okay, we had a question come into the chat from Ian Sampson. Ian, do you want to unmute and ask it, or would you like me to put it out there?
Sure, I get to ask. Hi, Katryna. Thanks so much for being here. This is my class, these people who are here. Yeah, I was just curious about you writing for Law360, because that sounds, I would assume it's a sort of specialized audience. And I wonder how different, like how much you had to change about the way you approach your storytelling, knowing that your audience doesn't have to be like explained what the appellate process is or whatever, right? And was that something that like editors kind of like ought you to do, or did you have to like work your way through that yourself? I was just curious about what that's like.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think that one way my writing has changed since starting this job is it's become a lot tighter, a lot more concise, because like you said, so we cater to lawyers and law firms and, maybe judges, and they already know, right? Like they already know what, like a law, like whatever law it is, they already know what it is. So I don't need to explain it to them. So like really getting to the like focus and the heart of a filing is really, really important, because they just want to know, what is it? Like they don't need an explainer. They just want to know like what the big points are. So I think because of that, and we try to keep our stories short, like anywhere between 500, 600 words. So we really try and like keep our writing very tight and concise. Whereas when I was an education reporter, it was a lot more feature style writing, like my leads were very creative, and, trying to like grab the general person was more of what I was looking for. Whereas with Law360, it's like, I already know that they're going to read it. So I need to hit the big points really high up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you.
All right. Well, we've got some time left. I've got two more questions for you, and then we'll really open it up to question and answers from the students. So the two questions, and I'll ask both of them together. What's something that you wish somebody had told you when you were in school? And then is there a piece of advice that you would currently give students that are interested in a career path similar to yours?
I'll do the second question first. So the advice I would give is, get internships or jobs or even freelance if you can, because I think the most important thing in journalism is to have content that you've produced to be able to show, even if it's just a short article but as long as you have a byline, that's better than nothing. So look for those opportunities to write, produce, whatever it is. Just have work that you can show future employers. Yeah, I think that would be my number one piece of advice. And then it was what was the second question?
What do you wish somebody would have told you when you were in school?
This is a tough one. I think that I would say just, I think that you shouldn't be I wish someone had told me that like, I don't need to be in such a rush to reach the peak of my career. I think that when I first graduated from St. Joe's and when I first graduated from Columbia, I felt like I needed to like already be winning a Pulitzer Prize. Like I felt like I was behind all the time. And then over time, I realized that like, actually, no, I'm right where I need to be. I can go at my own pace. Like success is, defined differently for everyone. And I have still, 30, 40 years left in my career. Like I'm not, I can slow down a little bit and just like take my time with things and, get where I need to be at the right time. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a good lesson, and one that probably takes some grinding and some working and some actual doing to get to the point where you can learn that. Yeah, great. Okay, are there questions from the students that you'd like to ask to Katryna? And you can do that by either putting things in the chat, or even better, coming off of mute, maybe turning your cameras on and asking away. Okay, so something just came into the chat. Nick is asking about your aspirations in terms of your career moving forward, and he's added there's a certain area of journalism you might want to get into beyond law.
Yeah. I think that I would maybe love to be an editor someday. I've spent all my career thus far being a reporter, and I would love to step into like an editor or leadership role at some point, regardless of whether that's here at Law360 or for somebody else. In terms of like a certain area of journalism, I think I would love to do like more work that's focused on, honestly, I would love to go back to local journalism if I could. I loved my time as a local journalist, and it doesn't have the greatest pay and it doesn't have the best benefits, but there is just nothing like being a part of a community like that. It is so fulfilling, and you get to meet so many wonderful people. So I think that, at some point, I would love to go back to local journalism, which I think most journalists leave and they never go back. And I think people would find it weird that I'm saying that, but yeah, local journalism is a gem.
Katryna, did you know that when you were in it? Did you feel that way, or did it take getting out of it to be able to look back and realize how much you enjoyed it?
I think it was both. I think that I really enjoyed the work while I was there, but now when I look back on it, it's just this feeling of fulfillment that is unmatched. Just because you really feel like you're providing a service for the people in that community. And like I said before, we got to a level where they really trusted me, and I valued that a lot. And I don't really get, not that, I don't love my job now, but, it's kind of hard to get that with lawyers and, judges. It's just a different kind of audience. So, yeah.
Okay, Maggie put a question into the chat. What was your favorite thing that you've ever written about?
My favorite thing that I've ever written about was, well, two things come to mind, but the first was, I wrote a feature about this. I don't know if he was like 18, so I guess guy, not boy. But it was a profile of him. This was when I was an education reporter. It was one of the first like real in-depth profiles that I did. It was about this guy who had gone to juvie for a few years. He had to leave high school. And then the story was about how he essentially changed his life through this local advocacy group and like mentorship group. And he got out of jail, and he went back to high school and finished his degree and was becoming a EMT, I think it was. And I spent like 2 months with him leading up to his graduation, and I was at his graduation. And I did this really, really in-depth profile of him. And it was just like a really great, like local story about this kid who just like completely changed his life, and, you know, about how the community supported him and things like that. I loved doing that piece. The second one that comes to mind was a little bit more education focused. It was about a school that was in a really rural part of the county that the Board of Education was going to shut down because it only had like 50 students and the neighborhood was decreasing in size instead of increasing. And it was like a 1.5 year fight. Even when I left, it was still going on. And it was like, I got to really really build relationships with the people of that school and see their fight to keep their school open and like why it was so important to them. Yeah, those are my two favorite.
Great. Maggie, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, was this the job in Maryland?
Yes.
I'm from Maryland.
Oh, you are?
Do you
Where
remember
are you
what
from?
school it was? I'm from Catonsville. It's like near Ellicott City.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Nobody really knows where it is. It's okay.
I mean, I know because I'm a Marylander.
Okay, thank God.
Yeah. Cool.
But do you remember what school it was?
It was Sibyllesville Elementary in Frederick County.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, solid. I felt like that's really cool.
Yeah.
It's a very cool connection. Thank you.
Thanks.
Maggie, thanks for asking that. Are there other questions that folks have?
I have a question, but my camera doesn't work. If that's okay.
That's okay.
So kind of early on in your career, did you ever think your career would turn out this way, or did you think it would turn out in something else? Like personally, I got a job working with the Phillies, and that's why I was late to this meeting. But like I never thought I'd be working for like a team like that. So I wonder if your career ever took a turn for the better or for the worse. I just wanted to get your insight.
Yeah, my career definitely took a turn for the better. I started off in broadcast news. So I went to Columbia and then I graduated and I started working for CBS. And I worked for them for 2 years, a little over 2 years. And I thought I wanted to be in television. I thought I wanted to be some like hotshot producer, waking up at the crack of dawn to, you know, do whatever. And I think broadcast journalism is great for some people, but the time I spent in it, I realized that that was not what I wanted to do and that I really, really missed writing. And that's when I found my education reporter role. And I remember when I got that job, a lot of people kind of gave me weird looks because I was leaving a national television network to go work for some small paper in Maryland that nobody had ever heard of. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people questioned my switch, or like, you know, leaving CBS. And it was the best decision I ever made. Because I knew I wanted to write, and I wasn't really getting that opportunity in television. So yeah, that was how my career changed for the better. And, you know, ever since then, I've gotten to do amazing work that I really enjoy. So yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Katryna, kudos to you for making that switch. That's not easy when you go against what people think you should be doing. So yes, yeah. That's career-wise, that's a huge jump, and congrats on making it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Are there other questions that folks would like to ask?
Well, I will defer to the students if anybody else wants to pop one into the chat. But in the meantime, I'm curious about, in my previous session, we also had a journalist, and both of you talked about like freelancing early in the career, and that there's a lot of that, and the idea of pitching stories came up, and that you should like, maybe if you want to get into it, that you should go out and make your own content and try to like pitch that. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that process, because I think that could maybe sound like daunting, right? Mm-hmm. To somebody who's like, oh, maybe being a journalist sounds like it could be cool, but I don't really know what I would write about. I don't know how I would pitch something. Like, I don't know what it means to be a freelancer. Like, could you give us like a one paragraph, like kind of a helper on some of that?
Yeah. So I have never worked as a freelancer, so I can't speak to like the details of being a freelancer. But what I will say is that I think, if you're struggling with like, what do I write about, or, things like that, I would say like think about something that interests you, like just like start off with something incredibly general, like for me, for example, law. And then just start doing research. Honestly, research is your biggest friend as a journalist. You need to know how to thoroughly research and just like find things. So I would say look super local. Look at like what sort of advocacy groups are out there, what sort of organizations, what sort of events are going on in the area that you're interested in, and then develop ideas from there. Maybe if you were interested in like women's rights, maybe there's like a rally going on and you could go and cover that. Or even if you went and you just like talked to people, you never know, you could get a story idea from there. You could meet somebody who's doing something who then, you could cover. It's all about like, I would say, finding things and then making connections and then just like learning along the way. And story ideas will come to you as, things will fall in your lap. But you just have to sort of make that initial first effort to do the research and like get out there. And yeah, I hope that's helpful.
I think that's a great answer. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
All right, anybody else? All right, I think we've done it. We covered
Could
a
I
lot.
ask one question?
Yeah, of course.
Hi, I'm sorry. I just thought one question before we end this. Could you just speak to the difference between like undergrad at St. Joe's compared to going to Columbia for grad school and like that transition for you? Thank you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, your time in undergrad is going to be a lot more generalized, right? Like obviously you have your major, but you're going to be taking, those core classes and things like that that are in other areas that are like outside of journalism or communications. Whereas with Columbia, it was hyper focused. So, you are only taking journalism classes, and it was a 1-year program. So it was incredibly intense. And the best way I know how to describe my time at Columbia is I was like 25% student, 75% working journalist, because a big part of Columbia is just like throwing you out there, and you just are, they're just like, okay, find stories in New York. Just, you want to be a journalist, you got to work as it right now, and we're going to help you along the way. But it was like I was working for Columbia as a journalist. That was really what it was like. And they even tell you like, don't even try to get a job, because like a job on the side, because it was that intense. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you for answering all these other questions.
No problem.
Katryna, I'm going to ask a follow-up there. What are your thoughts on going straight to grad school or working for a bit beforehand? Pros and cons. What do you feel?
Yeah, I think both are good options. I think it also comes down to your financial ability as well. If you feel like you want to work for a couple of years, save up some money, then go to grad school, I think that's totally fine. I just made the decision to go straight there because I was impatient and I just wanted to get started. But I think both paths are totally fine. I don't think you're going to miss out on anything if you don't go straight to grad school. If anything, I think if you work for a couple of years and then go, you might actually maybe find it less intense than I did, because you have worked and you have a little bit more experience.
I think the other thing that I heard you say is you were really confident in wanting to go in this direction, right? Because because grad school was so specific and so intense, right? You use that word a few times. I think that is a key for students. Sometimes I'll get students who will come to me and say, well, I'm not totally sure what I want to do. I think it's this, so I want to go to grad school and, to figure that out. And, we'll kind of say, whoa, let's slow down here, because if you go to grad school and if that's not right for you, it's not like undergrad, right? Like it's super specific to what you want to do. So that's the one thing, I think there is, if you know that it's what you want to do, great. If not, that's where working, I think, can really help. And I mean, sounds like for you knew that this was right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, working for a year or, 2 years or 3 years or whatever before grad school, it will, if you're not sure, it'll help you figure out whether that's the path that you want to take. And also, grad school is not cheap. So you don't want to go and then be left with this huge bill for something that you don't even want to do anymore. So that's something to consider as well.
Good question, Aiden. Thank you for bringing it up. Okay, we are about out of time. So if we can thank Katryna for being here and sharing some of her experiences and knowledge on the field, that would be great. We're really, so appreciative of you giving us some of your time today. As a reminder to the viewers, we did record this, so if there's something that you want to use back, it will be there for you, or maybe you're going to report on this day and you want to find something. So again, it will be on YouTube in about a week on our YouTube channel. So Katryna, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording here.
Thank you. Have a good day.